organizations have lots of potential outcomes with AI. So you'll see that in my podcast, in my newsletter. As a matter of fact, this week, my newsletter talks about agentic AI. And so if you take like that is the newest buzzwords associated with AI, but that could take an organization in lots of different directions.
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive impact by focusing on customer experience and culture together. I'm excited to have Bruce Temkin on the podcast today. Bruce was an early leader in the field of experience management. He was a vice president and research director at Forrester prior to launching the Temkin Group and co-founding the Customer Experience Professionals Association, CXPA. Then Bruce joined Qualtrics and launched the Qualtrics XM Institute. After leaving Qualtrics, Bruce started his Humanity at Scale podcast and Substack newsletter by the same name. Thanks for joining the podcast, Bruce.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about the topic.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun. I really been enjoying your Substack newsletter and your podcast, Humanity at Scale. Maybe just to get started, do you want to share with the audience what your motivation was for launching Humanity at Scale?
I think there were like two converging things that sort of spurred my interest in it. One was the environment, and one was sort of my professional position at the time. So if we think about the environment, for years, I've worked with organizations trying to have them focus more on people, customers, employees, and the communities they serve. And one of the things that I always saw was that what got in the way often was the viewpoint and inspiration and energy of leaders. It was leaders who somehow got the belief that they could either focus on people or focus on results. And all of those movements actually further exasperated that either or mentality. So I knew that there was a real opportunity to impact leaders. At the same time, if I looked at my career, I was having a great time at Qualtrics. I loved the XM Institute. I loved what I was doing, but I felt like there was an opportunity for me to have an even broader, wider, more profound impact on the world and how organizations behave. So those came together, and I realized that the way I wanted to do that was through a movement that I called Humanity at Scale.
Well, bravo. I love your focus on impact. And I know you've had a lot of impact already, through your roles at Forrester and the XM Institute and the CXPA that I talked about in the intro. I have to share personally, that's inspirational what you're talking about, wanting to have an impact. And myself, I enjoyed when I was at Booz and PwC being involved in associations and teaching and, being a guest lecturer or being part. I led a recruiting relationship for Columbia where I was, went to business school. And always wanted to give back and feel like I was having an impact. And that was actually part of my motivation to launch JourneySpark and to launch my own podcast, because I feel like I want to have impact with a broader set of companies than just the Fortune 1000. And also want to focus more on mentoring and coaching relationships than just big programs.
No, that's great. I always say that if I look back on my career, some of the most impactful moments for me was when someone would come up to me who I'd never met, who either said something like, you created the opportunity for my career, or I've built my career based on the things that I've read that you've done. And to realize that the work that we do impacts so many people that we never see. And so I get joy with knowing that I'm helping people. And for me, the way I think I can help people best is through content and sharing thinking and sparking new thinking.
I love the use of the word spark there. It's great. Very
Yeah,
on
you'll
brand for
see.
my.
Yeah, you'll see actually on my shirt and on everything I do, I talk about not just humanity at scale. That's the movement, but I talk about what I'm doing is sparking humanity at scale. Because sometimes people will say, "Oh, what is it that you're trying to do?" And I go, "No, what is it that we're trying to do?" Right? I'm trying to get people to help me create this environment of humanity at scale.
So there's a twofer here because JourneySpark, my own brand, has a similar meaning. The name JourneySpark is something I came up with talking to some family members that I think of there being 3 journeys, Bruce. There's the customer journey, of course, or the employee journey. There's the company is on a journey. You're driving change, you're building a movement at a company, you're sparking the energy and the movement. And then the individual leader or employee is on a journey, a learning journey. So I wanna spark energy, and ideas in the movement. So we're both committed to helping spark movement. So I think there's power in those words.
And can I push you to think about another journey? Because I think the world and the communities in which the organizations operate are also on a journey. And it was interesting. So my first podcast was with Don Norman. And Don, if you don't know him, he's the godfather of user experience design and user experience, right? And he shifted away from talking about user centric experience to humanity centric experience, recognizing that we can't really succeed in talking about the experiences we deliver without thinking about the context of the broader communities in which people exist. So that's also a part of the world that I'm trying to think about, which is that, and if you step back, right, there's a lot of divisiveness, a lot of arguments, a lot of not getting along in the broader communities, which actually plays into and starts shaping into how communities and people and how organizations and people and organizations interact. But I think it also can go the other way, right? If we can get organizations to figure out how to interact better, how to not be us versus them as much, to be more cordial, to be able to talk effectively, that we can actually impact the overall journey of the communities in which those organizations operate.
What you're talking about, Bruce, is the culture inside a company is the intersection of the brand, product, customer, employee experience, but the company is part of a broader culture too. So there's the community around the company is part of a broader community. Its employees are part of that, its customers are part of that. So you're encouraging a broader lens for culture and for community.
Yeah, I think it's important to, yeah, the answer is yes. And the reason is I think that as a leader, and I'm focused on sort of having leaders think about what they do, leaders have to think about the broad set of constituents and stakeholders that they affect. And the broader that they have that view, the better decisions they'll make that are more holistically valuable for humanity. Right. If I look at a decision very narrowly, like I'm just going to get profits for my company, then I'm going to have a different set of decisions than if I think about the decision I'm going to make is going to certainly impact profits, but it's going to impact the lives of my employees. It's going to impact the lives of the people who live in the communities where I serve. And if they have that mentality about the decisions they make, if we can get them to just think that way, then I think we'll start to see better decisions that serve humanity at scale.
You're reminding me of an article I wrote with my colleague Sujay Saha, who was a partner at PwC, a mentee of
Sujay,
mine.
good friend of mine. I love
Yeah.
Sujay. Yeah.
So yeah, we wrote this article, and Sujay was on the podcast recently, Bruce, and we were talking about his experience activism work he's doing at Cortico X, and we're teaming on some things together now. He's a great guy, and we wrote this article, Bruce, about leadership experience. And the idea was, we called it ROX cubed, return on experience cubed. And the idea is there are 3 experiences: customer, employee, and leadership experience. And the reason we called out leadership experience is that the way leaders show up and engage impacts the customer and employee experience. And you can intentionally cultivate the experience of your leaders. And we talked about mentalism, putting yourself in others' shoes, thinking about what other people are thinking and feeling are going to do next. And more strategic leaders think ahead about how the impact they're having on others, and they care and have empathy for that, and they don't make expedient decisions. They're focusing more on how it impacts other people. So it's higher ground thinking versus expedient thinking, and cultivating that in leaders, which is what the article was about.
That's great. It's interesting. My weekly newsletter, Humanity at Scale. So I'm going to pitch it because I want to spark humanity at scale. So why not? Um, I always end it with sparking new leadership thinking. 5 ways in which leaders can think and behave differently. So every newsletter ends with trying to get leaders to think differently. And I recently wrote one of my newsletters was about 2, which I think are uber ideas for leaders, which match the things I think you're talking about. I talked about intentions and reflections, right? That the leaders that have the most impact are intentional, right? They think about what they're going to do, they observe what they're going to do, and they're reflective. They reflect on the impact that they had, and they make adjustments on that reflection. So to me, the highest level that I'm pushing is at least be intentional and have some reflection on what you've done and the impact that you've had.
I think that's awesome. And I think leaders can be self reflective. They can also engage with others in the leaders, up, sideways, down in the organization, but then also outside their organization and peer groups and others. And one of the things that I mentioned to you earlier that I'm involved in now is launching a set of mastermind groups. I'm doing one with Randy Rothenberg, and one with Tamar Cohen, and one with Greg Kihlstrom. Here, let's listen to a quick 1 minute reel about the masterminds, and then we'll continue the conversation on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment, and with Greg Kihlstrom, host of the Agile Brand podcast, on a group focused on building a self-funding growth flywheel. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Bruce, I'd love to continue where we left off a moment ago about leaders, and really get your thoughts on where we are in the industry right now. Where is experience as a profession, experience management as a profession? Where do you think we are in its evolution, and what needs to happen next to realize its full potential?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I've started to think about in terms of the evolution of the space is that we will always be in the same relative position of evolution. That's a weird thing to say, but what I've noticed is that the need for deeper, richer understanding of people grows over time, as well as the capabilities and the industry that serves it grows at the same time, but doesn't catch up with the need. So we're always seemingly in what I would say is whatever metaphor you have around sports. We're in the first when the first 3 innings of a baseball game, or the first period of a hockey game, whatever it is, we're still in the early stages, but I think we'll always be, because the world's changing, right? Everything we knew about voice of the customer, voice of the employee is going to get somewhat outdated as we think about how we apply AI into that, right? So we constantly go into another curve. But the one thing I will say, one of the things that I think is important if we think about the evolution of our field, of the field of experience management, is that I think a lot of the practitioners in the field are promoting, not on purpose, but they promote through their actions the notion of you either have to focus on human beings and the experience of human beings, or you have to focus on the success and the business results of the organization. I have more often than not, the language I hear people use is things like, well, you have to focus on the customer, you have to focus on the employee. We keep doing that, then we're going to continue to be behind the curve. The language I want to hear, and it requires a different point of view and I think growth from the professionals in the field, is that we need to focus on experience to achieve the results that we want and also to be able to sustain those results over time. And until we get there, we're, the field, the industry, the professions are always going to be somewhere behind the curve because organizations are always going to need to focus on their own success. And the idea that we're going to create some false trade off between the success of the organization and some experience narrative is never going to work.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power and truth in what you're saying about avoiding false trade-offs. There's not if you're focusing on, short term versus long term, or creative versus analytics, or cost versus growth, it's a very zero sum mindset. It's a very adversarial mindset. It's a limiting mindset, right? Now, obviously there are trade-offs in the world, but what what we're talking about is often a both and mentality achieves greater results and, greater momentum if you're able to do that. I think just as an example right now, there's a lot of near-term focus on applying AI to achieve cost savings. Whether it's automating work or deflecting calls or reducing call volume or using chatbots, a lot of the emphasis goes on the cost savings rather than the experience improvement. You can have both. It's the false trade-off.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting. One of the articles that I'm actually writing, which will publish in a few weeks, is looking at the impact that binary thinking has on individual relationships and on organizations and the whole, right? The idea of we always think about things as or versus and, right? And is powerful because oftentimes you can get more of what you want without making the trade-offs you think you need. Now, having said that, if we look at the AI impact, I think organizations have lots of potential outcomes with AI. So you'll see that in my in my podcast, in my newsletter. As a matter of fact, this week I my newsletter talks about agentic AI. And so I think if you take like that is the newest buzzwords associated with AI, but that could take an organization in lots of different directions. Yes, some efficiency. Yes, some human experience improvements. Yes, potentially some human enhancements, right? But what we have is, as a cusp of moving forward, are decisions that leaders need to take about where and how they're going to apply it and in what ways they're going to manage and control its evolution to reach whatever outcomes they want. And my goal is to clearly inspire leaders to think the way that you just said, to think that we want AI to make the world better for human beings, not just, eliminate them from tasks so we can make things more efficient and cheaper.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it back also to what you were saying a moment ago about there's always something new. Things are always evolving. There have been different waves, and in organizations, often they'll create like a central team. For example, a center of excellence. And we've seen different varieties of this in different organizations. Like there's a team that's the central insights team, or the central shopper marketing team, or the central digital team, or analytics team, or what have you. And I've worked on designing and putting in place a lot of these teams with a lot of clients across industries, whether it was e-commerce or analytics or customer experience. And I've seen an evolutionary pattern where the groups tend to pivot to the next thing and broaden the scope of what they do. So things start narrower, and then as those skills get embedded and become more broadly accepted, like very few team companies now have a digital COE anymore because it's very broadly embraced in the organization. The same thing's happening to customer experience, where customer experience is increasingly combined with analytics and AI and digital and insights. It's less common to have a standalone CX team at a more mature organization. And if there is a standalone CX team, it's more likely to be the survey people, which becomes outdated in many companies. So they need to evolve. So I think embracing the newness and embracing the kind of how can we help build the next thing and drive collaboration in the organization is an opportunity when embraced.
Yeah, I've also I think we're showing our age. I'm showing my age more than yours. I've worked on transformation from when the internet first came, talking about how the internet, I need to center of excellence around internet, digital CRM. Been there, done that. But I think the what you have to think about for centralized teams and is that their role is not, even when they're customer experience, the role of centralized team is not customer experience, and that's what they have to understand. It's the role of a centralized team is to drive transformation around a set of capabilities. Now, that set of capabilities have been CX in a lot of places, but AI, quite frankly, in a broader term, probably has more potential for transformation than just the pure CX did, right? But that doesn't mean you let go of CX. The way you're going to transform around something like AI includes a lot of the core elements around CX. So I always push, and goes back to the I before I left Qualtrics like a year and a half ago, I did like a worldwide tour, and I summarized my discussions with like all the people from Asia to Europe, and what came up clear is that most of the discussions I had really nothing to do with what you might call traditional CX. It had everything to do with change management and organizational transformation. So that is what we're talking about. Now, we have to separate that that's what we're trying to do from the topics and the capabilities we're using to do it. So those changes that you see, those centers of excellence are always trying to move to the thing they think is going to be most impactful in the transformation of their organizations in the future.
I agree, whether it's content or analytics or customer experience or AI, it's about collaboration in the organization and where the center is collaborating with other parts of the organization. In a consumer goods company, the center is collaborating with the brand teams, with the customer teams, with the external customers, with the agencies. So the central team is meant to drive collaboration, and a lot of the activity and a lot of the behavior occurs in a distributed way across the organization, not just in the center. So you're influencing others in the organization by collaborating with them. And I think AI, to bring it back to AI, I think there's a huge untapped opportunity here to enhance insights, to enhance um, um, things people are collaborating on by applying the AI and not just use it as an automation mechanism.
Absolutely. I think one of the last few articles that I wrote when I was at XM Institute had to do with the application of AI inside of the insights, how to think about insights, right? What AI and when we talk about AI, has been around forever, right? I probably have written something about AI 30 years ago. I bet you I could find it. Um, what's new we're really talking about is the role that generative AI has played in accelerating AI. What generative AI gives us is the ability to to interact with a smarter engine in a human-centric way. So we can interact with it and ask it and apply it, and it also can bring us back that information, and it can understand human interactions and human data, right? So if you think about what at least what voice of the customer and voice of the employee, the CX and EX analytics are all about. They're all about how do we understand more about people so that we can drive more results, right? So there's the ability to access more varied data sources, to be able to interact with the analysis. And I'll give you just one quick example, right? If you think about how an end user might interact with analytics that a centralized team develops, or insights a centralized teams developed, oftentimes a person, let's say I'm a product manager, I'll have a very specific set of things that I want to know from all of the data that's been collected and analyzed, right? But the centralized team can't answer every question that I might have, along with every question that the customer service team may have and that the finance team may have. So generative AI gives me as a product manager potentially the opportunity to have a discussion with the data through AI to get the answers that I want. Like, I may want to know for my next sprint, what are the key features that I should be thinking about in this product we have, given what customers are using, saying, and missing already.
Have you been doing much or seen much around simulation now or synthetic research with AI? I recently had Nitsan Share, who's the CEO of Wevo, on the podcast. And if folks, I would encourage them to like and subscribe, not to miss any episodes like that. But Nitsan, we've leveraged Wevo. I first used them when I was at PwC, but it's basically they've taken a million user tests and run them through the LLM. So now you can simulate how different personas would engage with your feature functionality, your content, your marketing campaign, your new product launch, like any design decision. You can get feedback in minutes, and then you can always go out and test it, whether you're doing, split testing or user testing. You can get more data, but you can kind of come up with your "I wish I knew" statements and go test them rapidly without having to spend as much on development and in-market testing to save some of that money.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I have sort of seen them, and they do great work. But I go back to this is like an old story. I'll go, and it'll give you a sense of like old and new. About it's decades ago. I was working with IBM when they redid their website, right? And they had gone through and had 5 versions of the website that they were testing and A/B testing. And they were so proud of the fact that they had these designs and they were using A/B testing. That's how long ago it was. They were proud that they were doing A/B testing, right? Um, and they said, "You know which one of these actually did better in the A/B testing?" And I said, "Yeah, I know. It's the 3rd one." And they go, "Well, yeah," they were shocked, right? They just spent, several $100,000 of testing, and I was able to tell them in 5 seconds which one did better in user testing. And that was because I had, reviewed and designed thousands of websites, so I had a set of heuristics that I could do to evaluate it quickly. If you think about AI can internalize all of those heuristics, right, across all of those learnings that people have, and make those types of judgments. Now, it doesn't get at the nuance of what every individual might want in every situation, but it can capture the knowledge and understanding of a wide number of people and make really, really smart choices.
Well, especially if you keep humans in the loop too, and then you're interacting and augmenting the humans. Um, I think I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Bruce. I think there's at least two. I'm sure you'll come up with a third or fourth, but at least two powerful ways that AI is really changing the game when combined with human judgment. The first is content. So you can a lot of experiences or content, whether it's an ad campaign, a website, a mobile app, a promotional offer, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so you can optimize content, and a lot of product marketing, a lot of these experiences have content associated with them that you can now optimize with the AI within more of a culture of experimentation. The second opportunity has to do more directly with human behavior. And I actually think of this as like indirect and direct human behavior. Indirect human behavior is people collaborating on experiences like we were just talking about with content. You're collaborating to build a culture of experimentation. Direct is the way your employees show up in the customer journey. And then that has to do with training and mentorship and leadership and getting people to change their behavior in ways that deliver the customer experience. And increasingly, we can have insights about both of these, the direct and the indirect, because now we started this in the call center where you could start to measure sentiment and people would do QA scores of did this behavior show up in this call. Now, with more and more of the conversations visible, you can actually do scoring of interactions of your frontline employees and provide feedback or training or simulation. And this can link to your customer listening because you can ask, how did you make them feel? And what behaviors did they engage in to make you feel that way? So the AI is actually allowing a much more powerful approach to training and learning and development for the direct behavior.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think, uh, probably 10 years ago, I wrote, about how I thought that AI, and this is before Gen AI, but how I thought AI would be used to, change voice of the customer, voice of place, and that insights. And what I wrote about then was I thought that you would always need to have direct feedback from people, but you would use that feedback as a tool to optimize and to coach AI models, right? I didn't envision as much as we see today, but that's really what we're talking about there. Like, the value, if you think about it, the value of asking one customer or one employee to give you feedback about their experience is rather limited. And, I'm talking about large companies. Companies I deal with are like the Fortune 1000, right? Fortune 100, right? So the feedback of one customer, even 100 customers, is really a drop in the pan. So what they have to say, not necessarily really valuable, but
Because you might get 15 million survey results a year.
yeah. And so they all say different things, right? But what's valuable is if we can take that information and then use it to teach a model how to anticipate answers. Get back to the simulation stuff you talked about. That's when their insights are really bad, and that's when like response from one customer or 10 customers may be even more valuable than the million customers responses we used to get.
We saw this, a precursor to this years ago. Um, I did some work with Bizarre Voice more than 10 years ago, where we started mining the review content to tailor the packaging, the marketing, the coupons. And we saw a massive lift in the sales by tailoring it across different retailers and shopper marketing. So tailoring the displays, tailoring the content, all based on what you learn from the reviews. That was an early example of leveraging AI to tailor content. Now we can do this with far more data signals. And I recently had Dave Summer from Bizarre Voice on the podcast. He's helping drive brand, collaboration, customer solutions. He went from Facebook to Snap, and now he's at Bizarre Voice. So this has evolved a lot, particularly in like social influencer marketing. Um, but I think this game, like you said, the AI was visible 30 years ago. 10 years ago. It's just that the advances now with Gen AI are allowing a total, as well as simulation and rapid, a much broader set of use cases cost effectively. And I think it builds on the shoulders of the low code movement too. It's a lot easier to do things now and develop things than it used to be.
I think the low code movement and thinking about coding is a great analogy for thinking about what AI will do, right? I go back early in my career, right? And the way we used to do coding, I actually used punch cards, right? So I had to figure out how to do a bunch of punch cards. And then there was software that could create all those individual code statements. And then there was higher logic where you could ask things. And nowadays, I'll give you an example. My son is a product manager, and what he's doing now is learning how to use AI to actually develop some of the applications that engineers are doing instead, right? So what we get to is all of these levels. It used to be that we had to figure out what each individual command was. And now we're getting to the point where we get closer to asking for the output of what we want from the software, and the software gets developed. We're not quite there yet, but if you think about it, we're getting as we get closer, as we approach the point where we can say, "Here's what we want," and it gets developed, then we've reached really the pinnacle of development. And that's where we're going with AI, right? AI is it continues to help people at a higher level achieve the things that they want with having to worry less about the underlying plumbing.
So we're, as we near the end of the podcast, given your passion and your focus on humanity at scale, I want to reference a quote from your content and get your thoughts about it. One thing that really stuck with me is a lot of your work is focused on quote forces that either strengthen or erode the connections between organizations and the people they depend on, end quote. So about energy and humanity and the things we were talking about earlier. So what does the CX and culture connection mean for you in that context?
Well, I think that to me, CX and culture were never distinct. From day one, I always thought that, first of all, employees, customers, and the culture in which they operate are all inextricably linked in ways that you can't break apart,
You need
right?
all 4 X's. You can't deal with them in silos.
Yeah, I mean, an organization is sort of like a human, system, right? And it's an overall system. If you can't play with one part of the system and not recognize that there's gonna be impacts on the others. And so I always in my work, one of the things that I've always focused on was having a very system point of view and thinking about organizations, how they operate, how what their culture looks like, what their belief systems are, and those are the things that are ultimately going to impact how you treat customers more than a distinct focus on, oh, we're going to look at, voice of the customer, and that's the answer to the problem.
Love it. Yeah, for me, I titled my book "The CX and Culture Connection" in podcasts because I like you talked about transformation and having impact and driving change. I don't think you can have a really strong impact without focusing on leadership and culture. And so I really love the work you're doing and it's always been an inspiration for me and I've always enjoyed our interactions and really glad to have you on the podcast and to see where you're headed with humanity at scale.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And for your listeners, my goal is to inspire and empower you to create more human-centric organizations. So hopefully you get empowered and inspired.
Well, I'm sure you've sparked a lot of energy and ideas for the audience. And if people wanted to get in touch, should they go to the Humanity and Scale site, follow you on LinkedIn? What's the best way for people to get in touch?
So all of those things would work, but I would suggest go to humanityatscale.com, where you can find my newsletter. And my newsletter always talks about my upcoming podcasts. So I would go to humanityatscale.com.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure.